The past few months have been tough for Anglo American Platinum. The world's top platinum producer is facing shaft closures where 14,000 jobs will be lost and output reduced to a fifth. This will have a significant effect on the labour force. Let's take a look.
It's been 3 months since riots at Anglo American Platinum stopped production at mines in South Africa. The battles cost billions of dollars in lost revenue, and now the world's top platinum producer is closing 4 of its shafts and selling another. 14,000 jobs will go, and output could be cut by a fifth. That's around 400,000 ounces. Some posts may be reinstated in the future, but labour analyst Lone Sharp says the impact could be huge.
There is a significant crisis going on in South Africa's mining industry. And what amazes me is that government is completely inactive. There's no leadership, there's no indication. The Minister of Labour has recused herself from these processes. She's delegated responsibility for resolving labour conflicts to some secondary labour market institutions. There's no political seriousness to the crisis affecting our mines.
The reorganization had been expected. Shares at Anglo American, which owns 80% of Amplats, have lost a fifth of their value over the past year. And CEO Cynthia Carroll quit last October. Her replacement, Mark Utafani, doesn't start work until April, and he'll have a tough task rebuilding an industry which some fear is shrinking too fast.
South Africa's mines employed 1.4 million people in 1994. Today they employ just 523,000. And over the next 3 years, we're expecting mines in South Africa to lay off a further 200,000 work.
The latest closures could spark a new wave of unrest. One South African union has already threatened strike action, and platinum prices hit a 3-month high on their new supply concerns.
Well, for more on developments at Amplats, Tamisho Maganyele joins us now on the line. Tamisho, thanks for joining us this afternoon. You're, of course, on that end and speaking to workers over at Amplats. So what's sentiment like on the ground at this stage?
Hi, Alicia. Yes, I have been was in contact with one of the workers, and it shows that this also goes just beyond having the mine workers that will be affected. Because I had been speaking with a gentleman by the name of Johnny, who is a security guard in the waterfall area at the smelter in Rustenburg, and what he said was that this also came as a surprise to them. So it's not a fact that it was just the government that was blindsided, so to say. He mentioned that only yesterday, after the end of their shift, were they given letters as they were leaving the gate to basically let them know of the plans for retrenchment.
Tamisho, have the retrenchments become effective from today? Because that's one report that I heard. And if so, is there some confusion amongst between the workers and the management?
They did mention that it will be effective as of today. However, there are quite a number of people that are going to work. I will be making rounds with different mines that will be closing to have a look as to whether or not there has been any clarity at the moment. So we're still waiting to see whether or not people will be going to work or if they're staying. But at the moment, the people that I have been speaking to are getting ready to go to work and waiting on clarity.
Tamisho, when you say go to work, are they going to work or are they going to work to strike?
No, the gentleman that I'm speaking to, Johnny, who is the security guard, is physically going to work, not to strike, but to actually go to work.
Okay, well, certainly it's developments that we'll be keeping an eye on, and we'll be chatting to Tamisho through the day for regular updates as to all that's unfolding on that end, and continuing with the coverage of developments from Amplats. Now, of course, the ANC has been very vocal about their views on the miners' decision to cut jobs. Here to unpack this further with us is Peter Leon. He's a mining expert at Weber Wenzel. Peter, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, we've got the government being pretty vocal, as I said, about all that's going on. ANC commentary coming through this afternoon is that they see this decision by Amplats as cynical and dangerous in the extreme. Surely commentary coming through like this is dangerous in itself as well.
Well, I think the ANC and indeed the government are being very unhelpful about this process, because it obviously is a serious issue for the mining industry. It's a serious issue for Anglo American and Anglo Platinum, and I think it needs to be approached much more responsibly. And all you've seen so far from the government and indeed from the ruling party is a great deal of rhetoric and emotion. Now, I can understand these are 14,000 jobs which are being lost. That is serious in relation to the overall size of the mining industry and the size of these mining operations. But, you know, I mean, a mining company doesn't retrench labor just for the sake of it. I mean, there are economic factors in play here, and the company went through a one-year review before they did this.
Peter, it's Lindsay in Cape Town. I've got an email from a viewer who's been following this story with us on Power Lunch, and he says the following. He says, ANC spokesperson Jackson Matembu said this decision is part of a strategy to divest its business from South Africa and relegate the mines in SA to dogs. And then he goes on to say, well, of course, he's right, except it's about time the unions and government looked at themselves and their contribution to Amplats' actions. What about complimenting Amplats on spending 890 million rand over 5 years on job creation? There's two very strong arguments on both sides of this.
Absolutely, Lindsay. I mean, I agree. But, you know, the problem I have with the way in which the government and the ruling party have approached this issue, it just seems at the level of emotion, rather the element, the level of trying to reach some sort of an agreement around these issues. And in fact, the mining industry has a body called MIGDET, which is the Mining Industry Growth, Development and Employment Task Team, which is a tripartite mechanism that looks at these issues. And I would have thought it'd be much more helpful if instead of the government directing its rhetoric at Anglo American and threatening it with the loss of licenses, that actually took this issue to MIGDET. That's where it should be discussed.
Let's take a look at the detail of that, because as opposed to compliments being paid to Anglo Platinum, as you've highlighted, we've got threats coming through from government in a big way, and they've highlighted the fact that you know, when Amplats applying to switch from the old order rights to new mining order rights, they submitted a 50-year plan which included a social labour plan, and this now going against that plan that was submitted. They're seeing a review and saying that possibly they're going to put those companies who want to mothball shafts under scrutiny and ask them to surrender their licenses in respect of those shafts, but they can so that they can actually put those mining licenses to companies who actually see value in mining in South Africa.
Well, look, the answer to that is yes. Of course, any mining company which converts its rights, including Anglo Platinum, has to file a social and labour plan. And the plan is there and it's for a period, but it's not static. And clearly, if there are economic circumstances which intervene, which affect the viability of the mine, the mining company is in the business to make a profit. I mean, you know, obviously it's got social obligations and economic obligations and things like that. At the end of the day, it's there to make a profit. It has to give a return to its shareholders and so on. And simply to say to the mining company, well, you're in breach of your social and labour plan and we're going to take away your license, is very, very damaging for security of a tenure, and indeed for the whole investment climate for the South African mining industry, which is already under stress as a result of what happened at Marikana last year, which is only 5 months ago, last August. So, you know, I really think the government needs to be much more responsible in terms of the way in which it's approaching this issue.
Of course, Marikana was the reverse of the icing on the cake, Peter. But even without Marikana, even without labour unrest in 2012, is there a case to be made to say that Anglo American Platinum has mismanaged its business? It was a volume-led business. It didn't respond quickly enough to the falling demand for platinum group metals. It expanded too much. Its workforce was too high. Its cost base was too high, and that is why one of the reasons why the fallout, the dramatic action has been so dramatic.
Well, I really don't know about that, Lindsay, but what I can say is that the problem for all platinum mining companies is you've got ever escalating costs, and they're not just labour costs, they're electricity costs, costs related around that, and what has effectively been, until Marikana, and that was just a blip, a very static platinum price. So the costs have gone through the roof and the price has stayed the same. And the consequences are inevitable. And this is not just an issue that affects Anglo Platinum, it affects all the platinum mining companies. And you've seen the consequences of that.
Of course, Anglo Platinum's been highlighting that for the jobs that they're going to be seeing, the jobs that they're shedding, they're going to be creating 14,000 jobs elsewhere. Many saying that it's just not believable because of the lack of the detail in terms of where they're looking to create those jobs. How much of a responsibility is it for Anglo Platinum to put the detail out there so that it is convincing?
Well, obviously that I guess that will follow. I mean, I can't speak for them, but what I would say, at least they're making an effort to do that, and that's been given no recognition whatsoever by the government. I think there was some throwaway comment by the minister around that yesterday at her press conference. But the fact is, they are making an effort to try and give these workers other employment opportunities, and I think that should be applauded, quite frankly.
Yes, it should be applauded. Peter, one of the things that Alicia and I do every day is follow stories as they come through on the news wires. We get a show together and we comment on them for between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on the length of the interview and the subject matter. But what I often do when I sit at home at night and I go through everything and I write it down and say, this happened to Goldfields, this happened at Marikana, and there's a whole list of things that have happened over the last few months. And I've said before in the last couple of days on this show, and I value your opinion on this, this is a watershed moment for South African industry, South African mining industry, the South African economy and the way we do business. And I think history programs in the future will look back at this and say, this is where it all changed.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lindsay. I think this is it is like Marikana in a sense was an epiphany for the mining industry and the government and the country in many respects. So is this yet another development, and I just think that it really behoves the government and the ruling party to approach this issue very responsibly and to start attacking mining companies and threatening them with the loss of their licenses, given what happened last year, is, to say the least, extremely unhelpful. And the government should be looking at this issue much more rationally and much less emotionally.
So what would you like to see government do? How can they be acting a little bit more responsibly?
Well, I think what they can do, Alicia, is they can take this issue to MIGDET, which is what I said a moment ago, which is this tripartite body which looks at issues. It's looked at a whole range of issues in the mining industry. And in fact, the reason it was formed back in 2008, and I was on a task team on the regulatory side for a year or so, was precisely to respond to the global financial crisis. That it was actually established by the former Director General of Mineral Resources. And this is par excellence an issue, the future of the platinum industry, not just Anglo Platinum, that should be going there and should be discussed, and the government's always going on about the social partners. This is an issue which requires the input of all three social partners in order to come to some sort of reasonable outcome, rather than just attacking one party and threatening it with the loss of their licenses.
One thing that you can take it to as many regulatory bodies, committees as you like, Peter. But on the other hand, we've got into this rut now where workers are given double-digit wage increases when the inflation rate is 5 to 6%. That's been negotiated on their behalf by the unions, and if they don't get it, they strike. And in many cases, those strikes are violence. Eskom has, in order to continue its expansion and in order to provide us with electricity, has to keep on raising its tariffs, whether it be 15% a year, 10% or 20%. It doesn't matter. It hurts us all in our pockets and industry as well. And it seems to me that this is just an inexorable momentum that we're not going to be able to snap, and therefore mining in South Africa for the foreseeable future is going to be difficult at best and impossible at worst.
Well, I think that's correct, because if this continues, if you continue to have wage agreements which are way beyond or way higher than the inflation rate, the consequences are going to be inevitable, because at the end of the day the companies are there to make a profit, and if the labour costs go through the ceiling, workers are going to get retrenched. So it's actually very short-sighted of the unions to go after those sorts of wage settlements. And you saw exactly that issue, Lindsay, with Lonmin last year after the strike, because basically they're going to go down the same route. And so these are very short-term solutions which have very negative long-term consequences. And that's why, if we carry on down this route, we're going to land up with a much smaller mining industry. We're 500,000 at the moment and declining. We'll be down to 400,000 in a year or two's time if this carries on. And I think this is a wake-up call to everybody to approach this issue differently.